My mother always told me to give in to my sister. My father said to obey my sister in everything. My boyfriend wants to be my sister's knight. But me, I just want them all to pay the price. After waking up from the accident, I lost my memory, only retaining memories from before I turned 10. I stayed in the hospital for a whole week before the first person came to see me. She said she was my mother. "Wendy, I'm sorry, Mom's been very busy these days." She held my hand with guilt in her eyes. Looking up at her, I asked, "Mom, are you here to take me home?" They said I was an unwanted orphan. Will I have a mother now? My mother hesitated for a moment, then hugged me with teary eyes. She said, "Mom won't lose you again in the future." Resting my head on her chest, a faint smile curved my lips, with no emotions in my eyes. Mother brought me back home and settled me in a room. Not long after she left, someone came to see me. "Sister, I heard you lost your memory." She called me sister, so she must be my sister Julia. On the way back, Mother had probably told me about the current situation at home. Julia, 2 years younger than me, dressed in designer clothes with a pristine makeup look, but with clear disdain in her eyes towards me. "Julia." I called her name and reached out my hand. "You must be my sister, right?" She opened my hand, showing even more disgust. Backing away, I fell to the ground. "Julia." Mother's voice rang out. She hurried over, helping me up from the ground. "Julia, Wendy just got discharged from the hospital. It was just a light touch. She didn't stand properly." "Whose fault is that?" Julia crossed her arms and snorted. "I'm fine, Mom, it's not Wendy's fault, she didn't mean it." I reached out, grabbing her sleeve, staining her favorite dress with blood from my hand. "You're hurt," Mother exclaimed softly. "It's just a scratch. No need to make a fuss." Julia glared at me coldly, then turned and walked away. No one said a word against her, not even my mother, who just sighed watching her leave. "Wendy, don't blame your sister. She's just a bit temperamental. Actually, she's nice. You'll see when you get to know her better." My mother held my injured hand, speaking for the troublemaker. I nodded. I wouldn't argue with my little sister about these things. A tinge of guilt appeared in my mother's eyes. "Wendy, let me bandage your wound." After cleaning the wound, she fetched the first aid kit and applied the medicine powder carefully. "Mom, it's the first time." I looked at the wound, speaking softly. "First time what?" "First time someone's been so kind to me, worrying about my wound, dressing it." "Mom, you're really good to me." She paused, looking at me for a while, her eyes slightly red. "No one has done this for you before?" I shook my head, feeling a bit embarrassed. I couldn't even afford to eat properly. No money to buy medicine. Those days were really tough. I've had countless injuries, big and small. "You won't go hungry in this house." She patted my head. I nodded, then gently tugged at her sleeve, looking up. "Mom, Julia seems to dislike me. Did I do something wrong before?" Mother froze, mouth agape, before finally speaking. "Wendy, don't overthink. Julia couldn't possibly dislike you. She's just not good at expressing herself. Actually, she likes you a lot." I nodded, showing a trusting expression. "Mom, when I was in the orphanage, I always wanted a little sister. Now I finally have one." Mother seemed hesitant. "Wendy, Julia just has a bit of a temper. In the future, please be more tolerant of her, okay?" I smiled and nodded. "Of course, I'll be the best sister." At the dinner table that night, I met my biological father. Mother made the introduction. He appeared very stern, wearing gold-rimmed glasses, his gaze sharp as he looked at me, not quite like a father's gaze at his daughter. I sat beside Mother, feeling nervous, my eyes carrying expectations. It was a girl who had never had a father, craving fatherly love. Father did not show any emotion. He was different from Mother, more rational, a CEO of a listed corporation, the epitome of a capitalist. If he still had a heart, it was probably for Dad. A girl's voice came from the stairs, sounding coquettish. I saw father's stern face break into a smile, his eyes full of indulgence as he looked up at the stairs. I looked over too. Standing there was my sister, in a pink princess dress with a diamond-studded crown, gracefully descending the stairs, her smile brilliant. She looked like a princess from a castle. I caught her look, proud and triumphant, like a victorious general. I smiled without being affected in the slightest. Sister is so pretty, just like a little princess. Instantly, all eyes turned towards her, some showing surprise. What were they surprised about? Was it because I had changed so drastically? Did sister like my things? Of course. I said, my gaze fixed on her, not seeing the somewhat guarded looks from father and mother. They were worried I'd take sister's things. Do you want them, sister? Sister asked, her eyes full of disdain and contempt. I shook my head, my eyes serious and open. Auntie said, as a sister, should give in, take good care of you. If you like, when I grow up, I'll buy you more, okay? The auntie I mentioned was from the orphanage, where I lived until I was 5. My sister wasn't satisfied with my answer. Who told you to buy me things? I have a dad, I have a mom, they'll give me what I want. She had always been like this, saying whatever she wanted, and no one would pay any attention to her words. In everyone's eyes, she was straightforward, cute, and beautiful, like a pretty little princess. So, what do you want to buy this time? Ran out of pocket money I gave you a few days ago. Father said with a smile. Yes, I did. Sister reached out. Father gave her a bank card. She just needs to tell mom if she runs out of money. I've always known that mom and dad are the best to me in the world, her mother said. Sitting on a cold chair, I watched their heartwarming family scene as if I had been forgotten by everyone. My sister, 17, was in her second year of high school, while I, 2 years older, was 19. Because of something my sister said, I was arranged to attend the same school as her for the next year and a half. Wendy, given your current situation, you weren't supposed to go to school. It's because of your sister that I'm giving you this chance, said father. Wendy, I know you don't remember anything now, and I don't expect you to get good grades. Just take care of your sister at school, said mother. So, I wasn't going to study, I was going to be my sister's nanny. A bunch of school supplies were sent to the house, including backpacks and stationery, all used by my sister. Sis, Dad said that maybe you won't even attend school for a few months, so buying new ones would be a waste. You won't mind, will you? Of course not, these are really nice, I like them. I picked up the exquisitely crafted light yellow backpack, ignoring the few small holes burned into it. If you like them, that's great. My sister rolled her eyes and found it boring. My sister didn't want to admit I was her sister at school. Neither mother nor father objected. That's how I became the child living in the house, a girl who was pitted and extremely lucky in the eyes of classmates. My sister liked to order me to buy things. As soon as class ended, she immediately ordered me to go buy something. In a rush, while going up the stairs, I bumped into someone, and at that moment my body hit the wall. I instinctively protected the food in my hands. Nick? The person I bumped into was a tall, thin boy, pretty good looking, and he recognized me, but I was staring blankly. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Then, holding the snacks, I continued up the stairs. I knew he was watching me. The snacks I bought in a hurry were casually thrown by my sister to nearby classmates. I wasn't angry and still had a smile on my face. Julia, you don't have to pay for this one. What do you mean, you don't have to pay this time either? Julia suddenly stood up, her face full of anger. She was a proud person, always the one pulling out her bank card or phone to pay in the envied eyes of others. No, I misspoke, I'm sorry, it's all my fault. I bowed my head, apologizing repeatedly, until the teacher came in. Her cold gaze swept over me and said, "It's time for class." It seemed like the matter was over. I sat next to my sister, and out of the corner of my eye, I could see the complex looks from other classmates. Throughout the whole day, I perfectly played the role of Julia's follower, doing whatever she told me to do. The number of students paying attention grew, and in their eyes, I saw the word pity. Julia was very popular in the class. She had money, and basically anyone with a good relationship with her would occasionally receive gifts from her. She was the center of attention in the class, had a few good friends, and because of her temperament, everyone pretty much catered to her and flattered her. She always held her head high, speaking with a commanding tone, like a little princess. Under Julia's signal, the people around her started ordering me around too. I still obediently followed without complaints. This kind of day continued until Friday after school. During this time, I almost encountered the boy I collided with on the first day every day. Every time I walked past him in a hurry, always on my way to do things for Julia, he, although didn't stop me, would turn to watch my back. By Friday, as school ended, I found out his name was Nick, the same age as Julia, grew up together like childhood sweethearts. Their relationship was so good that they always went home together every week after school, but on this particular day, as he looked at the two people walking towards him, he smiled and looked at me. What a coincidence, we meet again. Julia's expression turned a bit ugly. What do you mean to meet again? Did you two do something behind my back? Do we know each other? I'm very confused. The boy froze. After all, he was quite well known at school. His gaze became a bit probing. I didn't make eye contact with him, holding on to Julia's backpack. I stood next to her, looking extremely gentle. Nick, you're too conceited. Do you really think everyone has to remember you? Julia sneered. Nick didn't respond to her. His gaze on me seemed to carry something else. After getting back home, Julia immediately warned me not to have any illusions about Nick. He couldn't possibly like someone like me. After that, she went upstairs to her room. I received a text message from an unfamiliar number in the living room. Do you remember Gary? This name was very unfamiliar to me. Don't know. Who are you? Wendy, it's better to forget. You deserve better. That kind of person is not worthy of you. Who are you? I repeated the question. You really don't remember me, we just met today. You used to call me Nick before. How can you forget me after losing your memory? Sorry, I really don't remember anyone after the age of 10. It was only after chatting with Nick for a long time that we ended the conversation, his final message saying, "Don't be afraid, I am here for everything." The next day, Julia took the initiative to take me out, saying we were going to have fun, and that's when I saw Gary from the text message. Wendy, this is my boyfriend, Gary. Do you remember him? Julia held the hand of a boy, looking extremely proud. In that boy's eyes, I could see a hint of panic, maybe because of me. Hello, I'm Julia's sister, nice to meet you. The boy stood still, with a hint of disbelief in his eyes, maybe not expecting me to not recognize him, but he quickly averted his gaze when Julia looked at him. Julia, didn't we agree that today was our alone date? Why did you bring someone irrelevant along? Did I interrupt your date? If that's the case, then maybe I should go back. I felt guilty and self-blaming. Julia didn't want me to leave. I don't care, you have to come with us today. So, I had to follow them, watching them walk hand in hand. Julia still behaves the same as in school, always telling me what to do. Not long after we walked, she asked me to buy bubble tea. At the bubble tea shop, I saw Nick. He was also in line to buy bubble tea. When he saw me, his face lit up with a pleasant surprise. Wendy, what a coincidence to run into you here. I called out his name politely. He seemed a bit upset by that. Wendy, just tell me what you want, I'm already in line. I can buy it for you, Nick offered kindly. I thanked him and ordered 2 bubble teas. After Nick got the bubble teas, he walked over with 4 cups in hand. He handed one directly to me, saying, "This one is yours. I remember it used to be your favorite." The warmth from the bubble tea in my hand warmed my cold palm. I looked up at him, a 17-year-old boy, with a clean and sunny smile. When he looked down at me, there was nothing else in his eyes. Nick, thank you, this might be the kindest gesture I've received since waking up. But Nick interrupted, Wendy, I don't want to hear you say thank you. Our distance shouldn't be that far. His expression darkened. I couldn't hold his gaze, so I turned my head to look outside the shop. Through the glass door, I saw Julia looking angry. Beside her, Gary was also staring at me, clearly not happy. Following my gaze, Nick's expression instantly softened when he saw those two. "Let's go, Wendy. I won't let you be mistreated with me around." I still didn't reply and followed Nick out of the bubble tea shop. "You used to dislike bubble tea the most, Nick. Why did you buy it and stay with Wendy?" Julia's questioning tone was too obvious, making others mistakenly think they were a couple. As her official boyfriend, Gary's eyes were on me, and his expression was complicated. Nick, who was smiling at me just moments ago, now seemed irritated in front of Julia. "It's none of your business what I do. Don't think I don't know you're planning to bully Wendy again. If you think I'm bullying her, then ask her if I've ever bullied her," Nick challenged, and their gazes both fell on me. "Julia is my sister. How could she bully me?" I smiled lightly. Julia was not satisfied with this answer. More precisely, she was dissatisfied with my role as her sister. "Wendy, you're just too kind, but don't worry, I won't let you be mistreated with me around." Nick repeated his earlier statement. "When did your relationship with Wendy get so good?" Nick's obvious favoritism made Julia unhappy. "After all, everyone has always centered on her. If you have a boyfriend, mind your own business." Nick's gaze shifted to Gary, who hadn't said a word, with clear hostility. Only then did Julia remember Gary was still with them. She looked flustered at Gary, who was staring at Nick with an unpleasant expression. With Nick joining them, the group of three turned into four as they strolled around. With Nick around, I no longer had to run errands. Every time Julia wanted me to do something, Nick would say, "Is your boyfriend just here as a decoration?" Usually, it would end with Julia looking upset and Gary going to fetch things. Julia's mood worsened. Especially when Nick and I talked, her face was full of smiles. At the end of the day, after Nick and Gary had dropped us off at the villa gate and left, Julia turned to me, giving me a cold, hard look. "Wendy, do you really believe that Nick would be interested in someone like you?" "Don't dream," she said. Julia snorted and walked into the villa ahead of me. That night, I received another message from Nick. It was clear he was reassuring me, telling me to rely on him for anything and advising me to stay away from Gary as he would hurt me. I asked him why, and he said, "I hope you can forget him completely. Perhaps only then will he have a chance." After chatting with Nick for half an hour, I told him I needed to sleep and ended the conversation. I put down my phone and looked up. It was completely dark outside, and the moon looked particularly lonely. Taking out a piece of paper and a pen from my backpack, I quietly wrote in the dimly lit room. After finishing, I put down the pen. Clouds gradually covered the moonlight, disappearing from the paper, leaving the last line visible, "Julia collected." Looking at the handwriting so different from mine, I smiled. I vowed to be the best sister and give my sister the best gift in the world. "What are you doing?" "Reading a book." In the classroom on Monday, I sat in my seat, flipping through my book attentively, when suddenly, the book was snatched away. I looked up and saw Mary. Julia had many friends, but the one she had the most fun with was Mary. Mary was also the only one bold enough to do things other girls wouldn't dare. She was rich, not as much as Julia, but close. 3rd grade in elementary school? Her incredulous voice was sharp and drew the attention of everyone in the class. They all turned to look. Look at them, 19 years old, sitting in a classroom with us is one thing, but reading a 3rd grade book, could this be a special child? Her words made everyone in the class laugh. Mary is also a person that some people want to flatter and please, so there were many voices of agreement. I held a pen in my hand, keeping my original movements and expressions. She seems like she wouldn't get angry no matter what. It's really strange. I heard she was in a car accident. Maybe she not only lost her memory but also got hit. Dumb, that's possible. The surrounding chatter reached my ears, but I remained unresponsive. Mary felt extremely bored, so she threw the book back directly. It's now lunchtime, with an hour left until the next class. She came back to help Julia with something. Julia has many friends, but she doesn't allow anyone else to touch her things. Mary is the only exception, so Mary was quite happy to do it. She reached directly into Julia's backpack and pulled out a small pouch. Along with it came a pink envelope. At a glance, it was a love letter. Mary didn't pay much attention until she picked up the envelope and saw the design on it, freezing in her movements. After a few seconds, she tore open the envelope, took out the letter inside. The classmates didn't know what she saw, they only saw her changing expressions, and finally, she left the classroom angrily with the envelope and letter in hand. What's wrong with Mary? I don't know, shall we go check it out? I'm a bit worried. Under the guise of concern, several people followed to see what happened. The rest either hesitated and followed or gathered together, whispering their own speculations. I turned slightly, looking at Julia's open backpack casually placed on the table, a slight curve appearing at the corner of my lips. But soon, I averted my gaze and continued to focus on reading. Nearly time for class, Julia finally returned, her face looking extremely unpleasant, carrying a fiery anger that made people dare not approach. Mary walked behind her, also looking grim. Her gaze at Julia seemed like she was looking at an enemy. Those who went to see what was happening also returned. In such a situation, no one dared to say anything. The quietness in the classroom lasted until the end of the first afternoon class, which was the homeroom teacher's class. Most of the students were somewhat afraid of her, even Julia a little. But once class ended, she had no more reservations. Mary, are you crazy? With such a boyfriend like yours, do you think everyone's after him? If he gave me a love letter, it's his business. If you have the guts, go scold him. Why come here acting all arrogant? Mary wasn't one to be pushed around and immediately stood up with a louder voice than Julia's. Julia, don't think I don't know what you're up to. You have a princess mentality, wanting everyone to like you and center everything around you. Do you really think they all genuinely want to be friends with you? Wrong, they just want to gain benefits from you. Mary's voice was sharp, and when she raised her pitch, it was even more piercing. But at this moment, except for Julia speaking up, everyone else remained silent, quietly eavesdropping. After years of companionship, no one knew better than they did where to strike each other to inflict the most damage. In the heat of the moment to hurt each other, their rationality gradually lost control, and everything that could be said or unsaid was said. Julia mentioned that Mary's boyfriend was a dirty scumbag who had been fooling around behind her back with who knows how many people, and only Mary treated him like a treasure. Mary was so furious that she brought me into it. She said I wasn't her adopted daughter but the daughter who got lost and found, shocking all the classmates. All sorts of looks were directed at me, surprise, pity, sympathy, curiosity, you name it. The situation alarmed the homeroom teacher. It ended with the two being called out directly, and the second class proceeded normally. After another class, I heard that the two were arguing in the office, even resorting to physical confrontation. The homeroom teacher had to call in the parents, and both were taken away by their respective parents. With Julia gone, the curious ones gathered around me, hoping I could satisfy their curiosity. I shook my head repeatedly with my book bag in hand, looking hesitant to say anything. Human imagination is the most vivid. They started to speculate, then used their own imaginations to come up with an answer, even if it had flaws. By discussing their versions together, it somehow seemed close to the truth. Selena. I walked over to a girl named Selena. What did you call me? Selena was one of Julia's frequent companions and didn't look too pleased with my gaze. I'm sorry. I recall Julia calling you that once, and I thought it was okay for me too. I lowered my head, showing my apology. Selena's mood improved. So, what do you need from me? Selena, Julia is in a big fight with her best friend now, so she must be feeling really awful. I know she doesn't like me, so I'm afraid to approach her, but you're different. She once said, aside from Mary, you're the one who understands her the most. Could you go and spend time with her? Selena's smile brightened, and her mind started to work. I'm a friend of Julia's, of course, I'll do it during evening self-study. Selena was no longer in the classroom. She had taken a leave specifically to find Julia. I glanced at her empty seat, then withdrew my gaze, a slight curve appearing at the corner of my lips as I looked at the book in my hand. The first gift had been delivered, and it was time to prepare the second gift. At the end of the second self-study class, Nick arrived. He was carrying a white bag full of snacks. "Wendy, I remember you used to love these snacks the most." He put down the snacks and leaned his elbows on the table, staring at me intently. The other students in the class glanced discreetly, no one dared to ask directly. "Thank you." I felt a bit overwhelmed, wondering if it was not right. He had already helped me a lot, and even found my books for me. "It's no problem. It's my pleasure to serve, Wendy." He smiled, revealing a set of clean and tidy 8 teeth, shining like sunshine right into the heart. "Wendy, I heard there was trouble in your class today, and I thought it was you as long as you're okay." It was Julia, it wasn't me. Classes ended quickly, and Nick didn't stick around for long. As he left the snacks behind. The next second, someone came over to ask about Nick and my relationship. "Wendy, does Nick like you?" "Maybe because of Julia, he knows Julia." I replied. "Of course, he knows Julia. Does that even need to be said?" Through their conversation, I learned about the relationship between Nick and Julia, because their mothers were friends, and they grew up together. Their relationship was good when they were children, but as they got older, it gradually soured, and now it had become what I saw. After evening self-study, I took the snacks and returned to the dorm alone, then I was surrounded by people. "Julia, what's your relationship with Nick? Why is Nick so good to you and even brings you food?" The girl speaking had jealousy in her eyes. "There are many people who like Nick, she is just one of them I don't know," I said. She directly snatched the snacks from my hand. "People like you and Nick are from 2 different worlds, I advise you not to have any illusions," she kept saying. It wasn't until they stopped that I spoke. "Can I ask you a question?" "Go ahead, what's the question?" Nick asked me many questions about Julia, but I couldn't answer any of them. "I guess I'm not a good sister." The girl who had just been blaming me was stunned. She sneered and threw the snacks back at me, hitting me directly. "So, you were trying to understand Julia through her." She still had jealousy in her eyes, but this time it wasn't directed at me, it was towards Julia, and for me, there was only pity and sarcasm. I remained silent, squatting down to pick up the snacks that fell on the ground. In the following days, I didn't see Julia at school. Mary and Selena were also not around. When I returned home on Friday after school, I saw Selena at home. She had succeeded in becoming Julia's best friend in just 5 days. Everything she had on her was a gift from Julia, all of them were valuable, even better than what I wore. At that moment, they were in the living room scolding Mary. Julia was cursing Mary as a backstabber. She and Mary had been friends since elementary school. Initially, Mary's family wasn't as well off, not on the same level as Julia's family. Mary had made Julia very happy, occasionally sharing grievances, which had led Julia to mention Mary to her father, helping them several times. Julia believed she had done favors for Mary, so what Mary was doing was repaying kindness with ingratitude. Selena was good at echoing her words. They noticed my presence, one giving me a disdainful look, the other following suit looking down on me. At night, Julia was in the bathroom taking a shower, and Selena was in the living room playing on her phone. I approached her. "Selena, your necklace is so beautiful." At the sound of my voice, she looked over, still smiling. "You might like it, but it won't be yours." I smirked. I remember Julia also has a similar one, but she doesn't like it. Selena's expression changed. Ignoring her reaction, I continued, "Selena, Julia shouldn't see this necklace. She said only beggars would wear such a necklace." Selena's expression darkened even more. I sat down on the sofa next to her. Dad really likes her. After hearing her words, he immediately bought her more and better jewelry. "So, are you envious of her?" Selena looked at me coldly, feeling her self-esteem was hurt and was desperate to find it back from me. How could I be? I shook my head. "She's my sister. Dad said everything in the house would be hers in the future. As an older sister, I should understand that." Selena looked at me, her gaze somewhat complex. If she didn't think it was unsafe here, afraid of being overheard, she probably would have cursed me for being stupid. Having the sister accompanying mom and dad for so many years, they like the sister very much. It's normal, it's just a pity I'm not a boy. Parents would like boys very much? Selena asked. I nodded. If there were boys, dad would groom him as the heir, but it's just a pity about mom's health. With technology so advanced now, there's no other way. I shook my head. There isn't. Selena fell into thought. Only when she calculated the time and knew Julia was almost finished showering did she get up. Selena. I called out to her. I remember you have a mole at the corner of your eye. It looks very pretty. You should show it more. She subconsciously touched the corner of her eye, not knowing what she was thinking of. Her eyes showed deep contemplation once again. As I watched her walk away, a smile played on my lips. Selena and Julia continued to be the best of friends. Even to the extent that every weekend, Selena would come to Julia's house with Mary, where she had her own room. Julia was very pleased with this friend of hers in her eyes. Selena was not as pretty as Mary, with a softer and more obedient personality. She took her words as gospel, just like a loyal dog. And how could an owner not like such a dog? I often heard people privately commenting on Selena, saying she was Julia's lapdog, always at Julia's beck and call. The voices grew louder, and Selena could not have possibly not heard them, but she continued to stick to her ways, without any change. The issues between Julia and Mary involved both sets of parents. Mary's family was somehow inferior to Julia's. Mary did not have a father like Julia's, who would selflessly put his daughter first. The situation eventually concluded with Mary apologizing to Julia in front of the class. Mary's boyfriend, irrespective of his background, had a somewhat charming face that could captivate Mary. In everyone's eyes, he was the main culprit, whether in Julia's family or Mary's. Even though he repeatedly claimed he had nothing to do with the situation and did not do anything, it was futile. Nobody would believe a repeat offender. No one would believe a smooth talker who didn't have a truthful bone in his body. Mary transferred schools. On the day she left, I sat next to Julia, silently watching as she coldly snorted. This is the price of offending me. I knew she was directing that comment at me. I understood Julia's personality, as well as Mary's. But what I understood most was their relationship. This matter would not end here. Quietness would only be on the surface. And what I needed to do was wait, and in that waiting process, begin my next plan. Nick is very good to me. He buys me elementary school books, middle school books, and even takes the time after every class to teach me the things I don't understand. Despite his family background and his guidance in my studies, the teachers, seeing that, advised me privately to keep my distance from him, fearing I might develop a relationship too early and affect the class atmosphere. I earnestly agreed. Julia couldn't stand it anymore. Every time Nick came, her expression was at its worst, and even Selena couldn't escape being implicated. Julia directly told her father and mother about this. So on a Friday night, at the dinner table, her father and mother looked at me with displeased expressions. Julia sat on the side, openly showing a gloating expression. Wendy, I heard you've been getting close to Nick lately, her mother frowned, looking disapproving. Wendy, Nick grew up with Julia since they were kids. They were promised to each other when they were born. How can you, as an elder sister, do this? In any case, I don't allow you to have any contact with him again. Otherwise, don't bother coming home, her father commanded in a tone usual of those in power. Even her mother did not expect him to say that. She glanced at him but chose not to say anything. Dad, Mom, rest assured. I'll never compete with my sister for anything. I've been like this in the past, and I'm still the same now, I replied seriously. I hope you can walk the talk, her father snorted and turned to peel shrimps for Julia. After dinner, her mother hesitated, quietly came over to comfort me. Wendy, don't blame your father. He has always been with Julia since childhood, so he naturally cares more for her. Is that really the case? Mom, Dad did nothing wrong, I won't blame him, I said. Back in my room, I received a message from Nick. He asked if I had gotten home. I directly turned what my father had said into text and sent it to him. He immediately replied, "Wendy, I never knew about this, and I won't let it happen. Please believe me." I replied, "Nick, perhaps you forgot or for some other reason, but I've already promised my father." "I'm sorry. But she already had a boyfriend." Even if there was such a thing as a childhood promise, it no longer mattered, Nick. If one day, your childhood promise with Julia is exposed, and Julia breaks up with her boyfriend to fulfill that promise, what would you do? I sent this message without looking at his response, and then added another sentence. "Nick, I can feel that Julia actually has feelings for you. Maybe you two will end up together in the future. Let's leave it at that between us." After sending this message, I set my phone aside without checking. A few days later, this matter was indeed exposed. Everyone knew that Nick and Julia had a childhood promise, but Julia had secretly been dating a guy 2 years older. Julia was panicking. In her panic and frustration, she saw me sitting calmly beside her and directed her anger at me. "Wendy, did you do this?" I looked up, feeling somewhat wronged. "Julia, why would I do such a thing? You know I have no friends now." "Of course, what capabilities do you have? Only you could do something like this?" Julia said as she left the classroom. She and Gary were sneaking around, even her parents didn't know. If they found out, they would never allow their precious daughter to be with a man they considered worthless except for his appearance. I watched her completely disappear. I didn't do this, all I did was let a few people know about it. After Julia left school and didn't come back, the teacher said her parents had asked for a few days off for her. I didn't care about what happened to Julia. I sat in the classroom reading with a pile of reference books. I didn't need Nick now. Most importantly, I could do this all along. Nick wanted to meet with me. After repeatedly telling him not to come, he left in a rage. Gary secretly contacted me. He must have been at his wit's end to think of me. He didn't dare to contact me using his own number. He used an unknown number. After explaining who he was, he said he wanted to talk to me. Agreed and scheduled a meeting with him after school on Friday. On Friday, I met him. It's been a while since I last saw him. Every time we meet, it's because Julia is meeting up with him and she brings me along. After she realized she could always see Nick when we hang out, she stopped inviting me. Gary's gaze at me was complicated, filled with deep guilt. It seemed like he had a lot to say, but there were more pressing matters, especially since I had amnesia. He talked, but I couldn't understand. So he directly brought up the current situation. "Wendy, do you know what's going on with Julia?" It turned out they couldn't reach her. "Gary, if that's all you wanted to say, I'm sorry. I don't know much. My father called me and told me to keep an eye on Julia, not to let her hang out with shady people. Maybe he just looks down on you for being poor, for not being up to standard. Just as Julia and Mary understand each other, no one understands Gary better than I do." His expression changed in an instant. "But rest assured, from what I can see, I think Julia still cares about you. Although she seems to care about Nick too, in the long run, she will realize who truly cares for her, who is most suitable for her." Gary's face turned even grimmer, his gaze heavy. "Wendy, do you also look down on me now? Does my opinion matter? You should ask Julia, after all, you two are together." Finally, I said time was running out and I got up to leave. Gary tried to give me some money, but I refused. Where did he get so much money? There's only one source, given by Julia. When I got back home, I finally found out what had happened. My parents still looked down on Gary and demanded that Julia cut off contact with him. But they overlooked two things. The two of them are in love, and this is the time when Julia's affection for Gary is strongest. The hope of her giving him up is slim. Julia has always had whatever she wanted growing up, and her parents have never forced her to do anything this time. It directly triggered her rebellious streak. She was even less willing to compromise. In the living room, I saw my mother sitting there silently in tears. Her beloved daughter didn't understand her intentions. She was being yelled at, all the blame was pushed onto her by her husband, saying it was because she didn't watch over properly that this happened. But this was not what she wanted, so why was everyone blaming her? Mom. She looked up and saw me standing in front of her. I held a cup of warm water and a clean tissue in my hands, my eyes filled with pity. Mom, don't cry. This isn't your fault. You did nothing wrong. When you're being invalidated, you feel wronged, but if suddenly someone stands on your side and tells you that you did nothing wrong, that sense of injustice grows exponentially. Wendy, Mom doesn't want this. Mom really doesn't want this. Tears flowed more freely from my mother's eyes, carrying words of grievance one after another. I set the water cup aside, gently wiped her tears, offering no words, but my eyes were brimming with unshed tears. After she finished speaking, she hugged me and cried. I just patted her back gently, whispering after she cried herself out, Mom, no matter what, your daughter believes in you and will always stand by your side. You have to believe in your daughter. She fell silent. Some time passed, and she let me go, her gaze looking at me with a mix of emotions. Wendy, Mom is sorry for letting you down. I placed the water cup in her hands. Mom, have some water. She took the cup and started sipping it slowly. Mom. I spoke again. Dad was probably too emotional today, that's why he said those things to you. You have to believe in him, he loves Julia so much, and you're Julia's biological mother. He should love you more. My mother paused in setting down the water cup. Is that really true? No, he doesn't love me, not at all. After sobbing, my mother was emotionally fragile, thus she blurted out the words she had kept hidden inside her. I stayed silent. After leaving my mother, I went to Julia's room. Julia had also cried, and when she saw me coming in, she glared at me, as if I were an enemy. I didn't say much but put down my phone. Julia, I know you're in pain. If you want to contact him, use my phone. Can you trust me? She hesitated and doubted. I sighed. Julia, I've told you, you're my little sister. If I don't help you, who will I help? I won't tell anyone about this. If I do, Dad and Mom will just blame me. Only then did she reluctantly trust me. I don't think you have the guts to do that anyways. I sat in the room, watching Julia chat eagerly with Gary. After a few words, a smile appeared on her face, looking so very happy. I knew how good Gary was at chatting, at making people happy. 2 years ago, he made Julia fall for him with just his words, which was the best proof. After staying in the room for an hour, I left with my phone. The next day, Julia voluntarily compromised and assured her father that she would have no more contact with Gary. Her father was very pleased, thinking he had succeeded. I knew it was Gary who succeeded. While her father was in a good mood, my mother suddenly brought up the topic of me. She felt I should learn something since I was already 19 years old, that I couldn't go on like this. If it were in the past, Julia would definitely have been unhappy, but now, with her heart set on someone else, and with me helping her out, she probably didn't think it was a big deal and didn't say anything. Father was in a good mood and asked me what I wanted to learn. I replied that I wanted a private tutor to study middle and high school subjects. Nick was indeed helping me with my studies, but I couldn't rely solely on his occasional teaching to make a big leap in my grades. I needed a good support system. It wasn't a high demand, and my father agreed directly. In the following days, my mother realized her debts to me and occasionally did things to make it up to me, but she didn't let Julia find out, afraid she would be upset. I cooperated with her, playing the role of the caring and thoughtful daughter in her eyes. That night, when I received a call from Nick, it was already midnight. Apart from me and Julia, there was only the domestic helper at home. Father was working overtime at the company and wouldn't be back, while my mother went to a friend's house and decided to stay overnight there. The phone connected, and I heard Nick's choked up, pained voice. Wendy, I'm feeling really awful. Can you come over and keep me company? I don't know who else to turn to but you. I looked at the pitch-black night outside. Nick, I'm sorry, it's too late now, and as a girl, it's not convenient for me to come and see you at night. How about I accompany you on the phone instead? There was silence on the other end, then he agreed. That night, I stayed on the line with him until daybreak. He talked a lot about how he had a cat that he had been raising for many years, but now it had run away, and he had completely lost it. He said his mother had bought him that cat when she was alive, and over the years, it had been by his side every day, becoming an inseparable part of his life. Not a family member, but more important than family. He said he had looked for it for a long time, but couldn't find it anymore. He was afraid it would fall into the hands of bad people, afraid it wouldn't be cared for. I listened quietly to his voice, and finally spoke. Nick, maybe it will find a good owner, you should wish it well. Nick fell silent, and I softly sang a gentle folk song to him. After half an hour of humming, I heard Nick's voice. Wendy, I think I might be starting to like you. I looked out the window again. The pitch-black night had completely dissipated, and the first rays of sunlight were shining on the windowsill. Nick, look, it's getting light outside. After that day, Nick treated me better, openly better. He sent all sorts of food and supplies to me one after another. Julia looked very unhappy, but Nick didn't care about her at all. Even if she threw tantrums, he ignored her, and didn't let her bully me in the slightest. Julia wanted to tell her father and mother directly. But Nick threatened her. If she really did that, he would also reveal her and Gary's affair. Julia didn't dare to say anything, just glared at me repeatedly. Gary sent me many messages from different numbers, telling me to stay away from Nick, not to trust him, he was not a good person. I ignored these messages, they kept coming for several days until they stopped. Julia's 18th birthday arrived naturally. Father wanted to have a big celebration, and as Julia's sister, I had to attend. Julia looked at me with undisguised glee. She was planning to embarrass me on her birthday. Well, I also prepared a big gift for her. On the day of the birthday banquet, many people came to attend. Some were Julia's acquaintances, some had good relationships with Father and came to show support. Father really loved Julia, taking many photos of her every year since she was born. He was planning to project them all today. If that's what he intended, these photos should be tear-jerking. However, when the projector turned on, it displayed a pregnancy test report with the name Selena written on it. What's going on? Father looked panicked at the paper. Julia, confused, instinctively wanted to find Selena, to ask her what was going on, but then remembered that Selena was not feeling well and hadn't come today. The photos on the projector changed, this time showing an intimate photo of Selena with a man. That man was her father. She instantly realized what was happening, looking at her father in disbelief. As more photos kept appearing, her carefully planned 18th birthday party turned into a farce. Even though Father had the projector turned off, it couldn't undo what had happened. Distraught, Mother fainted. I watched the chaotic scene, a slight smile on my lips, then walked over and helped lift Mother up with the staff. Let's take Mom to the hospital. The staff, somewhat flustered, immediately obeyed my instructions. When Mother woke up in the hospital, I was the only one beside her. She looked around instinctively, not seeing anyone else. Her eyes couldn't hide the disappointment. She started crying as she looked at me. Julia, your father did this, what should I do? She probably never imagined that her once happy family could turn into this, on the verge of completely falling apart at any moment. Mom, this isn't Julia's fault, I don't think she intended it. She probably didn't know that the classmates who visited our house every day had such intentions. Mother remembered. Selena was brought to the house by Julia. At that moment, no matter how much she loved her daughter, she couldn't help but feel a bit of resentment. Moreover, her daughter wasn't there when she woke up in the hospital, unlike the other daughter who had been lost and found. Mom, Julia didn't come, maybe she's dealing with something more important. I spoke again. Mother remained silent, her expression still grim. What could be more important than her own mother's health and well-being? This was no small matter. Father and Julia were busy for days, without coming to see Mother. I went out every day, bringing Mother's favorite fruits each time, sitting by her and politely inquiring with the nurses. In no time, I became, in the eyes of nurses and other patients, a caring and sensible daughter. Whenever Mother saw me, she would glance behind me, disappointment evident in her eyes. Wendy, how will your father handle this? She held my hand and asked. According to Dad, he won't investigate further. What? Mother's voice rose, her eyes widened, as if about to pop out. How could he not pursue it? How could he just let it go? What about her? Is she just a joke? Mom, don't worry, Julia is also on Dad's side on this. They probably feel sorry for Selena. Even Julia says that? Mother was beyond furious. How could her own daughter treat her like this, especially in a situation like this? Father never loved her. She knew that, so early on, she had given all her love to Julia, considering her everything, her future reliance. Julia's choice undoubtedly dealt her heart a heavy blow. I gently comforted her, allowing the distraught mother to hold me tightly. Mom, remember, you still have me. I am your daughter, the daughter you bore for 9 months. With the gentlest tone, I pushed these words into her heart. After Mother fell asleep exhausted, I sat quietly beside her with my phone. Father and Julia didn't dare to confront Selena, as I had expected. It was I who casually leaked a piece of information to Selena, suggesting that there had been other women pregnant by Father, but that issue had quickly quieted down, and those women had disappeared without a trace. The message was false, but Selena didn't dare to verify it. She was perceptive and capable of sensing others' emotions, and after being with Father, she knew that this man had a cruel heart and was likely capable of such a thing. She was afraid of ending up with nothing, reputation tarnished, and she thought of Mary. Mary had harbored a grudge against Julia, feeling unable to retaliate, until now. She made Selena comply with everything Julia wanted, capturing videos that could be used against Julia. Father was an accomplice to some extent. At this moment, Gary has persuaded Julia to have an affair. Emotions are escalating rapidly. People who have tasted forbidden fruit usually want a second taste, but the hotel requires ID, risking her father's discovery, which is unsafe. Selena provided a clean room, with a hidden camera inside. It was within my expectations that Gary and Julia would have an affair. No one understands him better than I do. I know his ruthless nature in achieving his goals, and I have dropped hints already. Take it slow, one step at a time. I gazed at the harsh sunlight outside the window and smiled contently. Perhaps from juggling between studying and taking care of my mother every day, when I left that day, I misstepped and fell from upstairs, landing unconscious. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, and I immediately saw Nick, his face filled with anxious worry, bloodshot eyes, and dark circles. How could you be so careless? How did you fall? He said, looking at me nervously. I smiled sheepishly at him. I'm sorry, I made you worry saying this. Why did I say that? I'm not worried about you, who else would I worry about? He said, cutting an apple for me with a concerned look. The nurse told me I was unconscious for 3 days, and my mother was very worried. If she hadn't been unwell, she would have come to see me herself. My condition was better than hers. I was up and about within 3 days. Nick shuttled between me and school every day. I told him to focus on his studies, would be fine soon enough. Reluctantly, he left. The next day after he left, I went to my mother's room, holding a clean folder. Mother was sitting on the bed, looking sad that no one came to see her even after so long. I sat down in front of her, and she only noticed me after a while. Wendy, you're here. Mom, I think you should know about this. I handed her the folder. Mother looked at me in confusion, but after reading its contents, her fingers trembled, her pupils contracted, as if she might faint at any moment. Is this information true? She asked me in a trembling voice. I nodded, telling her to check if she didn't believe it. How is this possible? She is my daughter, the one I carried for 9 months. How can she not be related to me? But that's the truth, your daughter is not your biological daughter. Then where is your biological daughter? Where is she? Mother clutched my hand tightly. She's dead. With the most calm voice I had, I said the cruelest words, killed by her own father, the biological father. Only in this way can he make space for a child from the woman he truly loved. This was a guess, but it was not important. What mattered now was making my mother believe. Didn't you notice that Julia doesn't look like you? Why is it that, as daughters, Julia is his heart and soul, while I am the unwanted weed he didn't even want to look at, because I came from inside you. Guess again, why can't you conceive anymore after eating what you shouldn't have eaten? He wanted to make up for his beloved, so he prepared to give everything to Julia, and anyone or anything that stands in Julia's way, he wouldn't allow to exist. My words entwined my mother like a curse, causing her unbearable pain and helplessness. I had seen a picture of his beloved, with her name Sandy, a shallow mole at the corner of her eye. Coincidentally, Selena had a mole in the corner of her eye too, though not as shallow as the woman's. But I had meticulously selected her. Selena was different from Sandy, besides the mole. Their personalities were different too, but even though I had not seen Sandy, I could guess a few things based on my father's preferences. He liked clean and innocent. It's fine, Selena is good at reading people, good at understanding minds, most importantly, she has a greedy heart, and not a stupid brain. I waited quietly for my mother to calm down, then she looked at me with a complex gaze. How did you know all this? I've started remembering. I said. As for how I knew, it's not necessary to say now. Mom, only I will always stand by your side. Do you want them to regret? Do you want revenge for my deceased sister? It was in that moment I revealed my ambition, hiding under that calm surface, the most grandiose ambition. Mother stared blankly at me. What do you want me to do? I whispered gently in her ear. Straightening up, she eyed me with hesitation and struggle, before nodding. Okay, I'll listen to you. She clenched her fists tightly. I want them to regret it. This woman who had endured compromise for decades was finally pushed to the brink. After leaving the hospital, I received a call from Nick. He said he missed me and wanted to come see me. I nodded and agreed. For the next month, I did nothing, quietly staying by Nick's side, accompanying him in whatever he wanted to do. Selena's situation escalated. Despite Julia trying to hide the affair, her father discovered her involvement with Gary, causing unrest in the family. In the past, Mother would have been caught in the middle, torn between sides, but now, she stood on her husband's side, immune to Julia's tears. A month later, summer vacation arrived. Julia and her father were still in conflict, but there were a lot of things waiting for her father to handle at work. Unable to manage both sides, and with my persuasion, my mother requested for me to intern at the company. Father didn't want to agree, but my mother's rare determination forced him to compromise in the end. So I walked into the company, didn't have much time with Nick. He got upset, started coming to find me every day, but I had too much to learn, no time to spend with him. He would just sit in the break room watching me. Julia got into trouble. To rebel against her father, she ran away secretly. I knew her plan. She wanted to force her father to yield, but she didn't expect it to go wrong. She got kidnapped. Her father received a message warning him not to act recklessly, or else Julia would die. That man with sharp eyes and imposing aura, over these few months, had grown white hair on his head and many wrinkles on his face. Mother pulled me into the room. What are you trying to achieve? What if you get caught? I said to reassure her. Mom, don't worry, I won't actually harm Julia. Mother felt relieved, couldn't bear to let her daughter die for real. Dad, do you think Gary is involved in this? I walked into the study holding Dad's favorite tea. Dad was worrying about Julia's situation. My words caught his attention. What are you trying to say? I gently placed the tea on the table. Dad, arguing with sister like this over Gary, would you let Gary off? Dad remained silent. He wouldn't. His precious daughter being so defiant for an outsider made him resent Gary deeply. Gary knew it too, so he had to consider his future. My reasoning made sense. Looking at Dad lost in thought, I added, Dad, he probably just wants money. How much? If giving it can ensure Julia's safety, it's worth it. They didn't ask for anything. This was the most confusing part for Dad. Why would kidnappers not make any demands? It didn't make sense for them to kidnap Julia without asking for something in return. Julia went to Nick's house again, but she wasn't welcomed and was forcefully kicked out. Without Julia's protection and with all the people she had offended throughout her life, her future was not looking good. Mary was definitely not going to let her off the hook, just like when Julia was in power. Now she finally had the chance for revenge and she wouldn't miss it. As the new semester started, there were 2 empty seats in the class. Selena's and Julia's. After finding out that Julia was not his child, Selena's father contacted her hoping she would have the child. He wouldn't accept Selena, but would accept the child and offer a reward. Selena was tempted, but she was not pregnant. The list from before was fake, forged, only the photo was real. Julia's situation became public knowledge. She didn't dare to use another child to deceive her father, so she told him that Julia had caused trouble for her and the child was lost in the process. This made her father furious and he hated Julia even more. Nick also didn't come to school. They said he was in a car accident and was still in the hospital. The girls in the class who liked him went to visit him. After they returned from visiting, someone approached me. "Wendy, why didn't you go see Nick after what happened?" I asked, "Why should I go? You know he likes you, how can you be so heartless?" A female classmate accused me. I wasn't interested in him. Nick really liked me, I knew that, but so what? He sent me lots of messages, and I only went to see him occasionally. Every time I went, the boy was sitting on the hospital bed with a cast on his hand. His not-so-attractive face immediately softened when he saw me come in, with a smile. I saw the look of pure adoration in his eyes, and how he tried to find topics to catch my attention. But none of it sparked any interest in me. Nick lay in the hospital for 2 months. When he got out, he found out I had already started college and slowly began taking over my father's company. My father didn't like it, but he had no choice. Now he only had me as his biological daughter. Everyone in the company knew who I was. At first, I didn't do so well, but gradually, I was able to take control. Compared to my father, who was becoming more emotional and had a worse temper, I seemed more likable and easier to approach. Nick's family wanted to form an alliance with ours, to have me be with Nick. My father was hesitant, but my mother supported the idea. However, I refused. Why? The boy came up to me, asking, "Is it because my hand is useless and you're repulsed by it?" He didn't understand why I had changed. I used to talk to him so gently, chat with him, comfort him all night, and be grateful for his help. Now I had become a stranger to him. I looked at his unnatural wrist. His hand was completely useless. He couldn't even use a little bit of strength. "Do you remember when I asked you if you wanted me to recover my memory? You said you didn't want that." It was just a casual chat. I had a reason for saying that back then. I was afraid that if he regained his memory, he would fall in love with Gary again and not see me. Yet, here we are, with my memory fully restored. I smiled, enjoying his quick change in expression, panic, fear, and deep regret. "Wendy, I'm sorry," he said. "Was that going to make a difference?" I asked. His face was pale, but there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Wendy, have you also developed feelings these days? Have you?" "Nick." I called his name. "What makes you think a victim would fall for the person who harmed them?" My words seemed to have sentenced him to death. He staggered back, his face turning even paler. "So my hand is your doing." I stayed silent. This was an admission. I watched him flee, his steps full of panic. Yet, Nick's family still sent a marriage proposal. I rejected it and my father said nothing. With the alliance between the two families, we would definitely climb a higher social ladder, which was good, but my father didn't want that. I wasn't the heir he wanted to see. My mother was puzzled. "I thought Nick was a nice boy, didn't you like him too?" I never liked him, not at all. Everything was just a charade before, but now, I don't want to pretend anymore. My mother looked at me as if she didn't know me anymore. "Wendy, have you been scheming all along? How can you be so cunning? You are too much like him, really too much like him." The him in my mother's mouth referred to my father. She had figured it out, that I faked amnesia, that everything was my doing. "Mom, you forget, I am his biological daughter. Daughters resemble their fathers, isn't that normal?" My mother looked at me, silent for a long time, then she compromised and left. Now that she had completely severed ties with my father, and with Julia, who she once relied on being not her real daughter and kicked out, I was her biggest support. After my mother left, I fell asleep on the desk in the study. I had a dream where I saw my past. I had lived in an orphanage since I could remember. The matron at the orphanage told me I had been abandoned by my parents. The orphanage was big, with dozens of children and a few matrons. The living conditions were not great. There was food, but not much, and I was often hungry, having to endure it. I learned to read the matrons' expressions and tried to please them. Only in this way can I get more than others, so my aunt will take better care of me, and no one will dare to bully me. The second thing I learned was to resist. Where there are many people, there is much mischief, and even children are no exception. In the corners where my aunt cannot see, those with a soft temperament are easy targets for bullying. I have observed that if someone does not resist or fails to resist the first time they are bullied, and then does nothing afterward, they are more likely to face bullying again and again. Bullies only target those who are easy to bully, so I must make myself less easy to bully. When I was 5 years old, I was adopted by an ordinary family. Before being adopted, I was looking forward to it, thinking that I would have my own home and not go hungry anymore. However, what they wanted was a labor force to help with chores. On the first day I was brought back, they taught me how to do things. At first, it wasn't difficult: sweeping, scrubbing, running errands. Doing well didn't earn any rewards, but making mistakes always led to punishment. At first, I had no complaints. They provided me with food, clothes, shelter, so it was only right to do chores and accept punishment for mistakes. It wasn't until some time later that I realized not only did I get punished for mistakes, but also when they were in a bad mood. The severity of their punishment depended on their mood. Sometimes after being beaten, they wouldn't let me eat, and at night they would lock me out, not allowing me to come in. Many times, I slept at the door on an empty stomach. If I was lucky, a kind-hearted person would give me some food, but these situations were too rare, and I was caught once by my foster father. So the next time, they locked me in a room and didn't let me eat for 2 days. I had stomach problems since a very young age. They had a son 4 years older than me, their golden boy. They doted on him, never scolding him. The boy had a bad temper and loved to bully me, causing trouble when I worked, adding insult to injury when I made a mistake and was punished, and venting his frustrations on me when he was in a bad mood. When I was locked in a room and hungry for 2 days, he appeared with a piece of bread, humiliating me with his words, breaking the bun into pieces and throwing it on the floor, watching me, starving to the extreme, pick it up without caring about the dust and shove it into my mouth. To survive, I lost my dignity, I lost everything. I met Gary when I was 10 years old. I wanted to escape from there that year, as far away as possible. When I was starving, I met Gary, who was the same age as me. Gary gave me a piece of bread, and later I found out it was his dinner. Gary and I became friends because of a piece of bread, and because of our shared unfortunate fate, we became each other's most important people. He wasn't adopted, but his mother had died, and his father had remarried and had a son with his new wife. We had the same goal: to leave that place, go anywhere, totally leave that place. My foster parents didn't want me to go to school. The town school was free, but required book fees, which they were unwilling to pay. Sending me to school meant they would have one less laborer at home. Reluctantly, with compulsory education for 9 years, they had no choice but to send me to school with a black face. Gary and I knew that studying was the only way out for us, so we put all our energy into studying, supervising, and helping each other. No one dared to bully us at school. We were willing to fight to the death for each other. His brother brought a large fierce dog to chase us one time, and Gary got bitten trying to save me. His brother pushed him into the river one winter, and I used all my strength to pull him out. That time, we almost lost everything. The year Gary turned 14, after finishing the high school entrance exam, he barely entered a third-rate university. Our foster parents were delighted and said they would reward him. They went to a nearby town for fun, and when the car was crossing a mountain road, a mudslide occurred, and none of the 3 survived. Everyone lamented the loss of life, but I lay on the bed and smiled all night. No one wanted me, as a burden. No one wanted to be my guardian. Gary wanted to help me but was too powerless. Fortunately, a teacher helped me apply for a poverty allowance, so the cost of studying was fully covered, preventing me from missing school or starving to death. At 16, I entered high school, the age when young love blossomed. Gary and I were no exception. We fell in love with each other, everything was done secretly, afraid of being discovered. The boldest thing we did was hold hands with flushed faces. It was a very pure and innocent kind of liking. Wendy, when I graduate from college, when I make a lot of money in the future, let's get married. The starry-eyed teenager had pure and passionate eyes, full of thoughts and love for me. And I felt the same way. At 17, people claiming to be my birth parents found me. I knew I was an orphan, and before turning 17, I fantasized about my birth parents. I had never said it out loud, but I had imagined what it would be like if they found me. Would they treat me like my foster parents treated their son, calling me baby, indulging me? But the reality was different. They already had their baby, Julia, a child who had been raised in the palm of their hands, just like their son. She hated me like their son did, rejecting me. But unlike their son, she didn't dislike Gary and even quite liked him. She had different faces, acting fearlessly in front of her father and mother, doing anything, including bullying me if she didn't like me. In front of Gary, she would be coquettish, throwing tantrums, like a little princess in a castle, radiant with light, without a trace of darkness like me, completely different types at first. Gary sided with me, but time can really change a person. In 2 years, he too was drawn to Julia, who was full of bright smiles and youthful energy. These were things I didn't have. My past experiences had eroded away everything a 17 or 18-year-old girl should have. I had become a thorn all over. Instead of looking pitifully at him after being bullied, I tried my best to retaliate. After nearly a decade of being together, no one knew Gary better than I did. I was the first to notice his change of heart. I liked him a lot, but from the day he started liking Julia, I knew this affection could come to an end. Julia had everything. Parents who seemed to hate her but actually unconditionally stand by her side. This is the childhood friend who stands behind her. When first seeing Nick, he was standing behind Julia. His words seemed disdainful, but he was holding Julia's book bag, wearing a smile full of indulgence in his eyes. When he saw me, his smile disappeared and turned into a warning. He warned me to behave myself and not covet things that don't belong to me. Everything in the family belongs to Julia. If I said one bad thing about Julia, it was my fault, and Julia mocked me in various ways and even bullied me with others. He thought it was only natural. Even though I returned to my biological parents, I experienced the same life as when my foster parents were alive. They didn't treat me as family at all. In Julia's eyes, I was just a dog. My father only cared if I hurt his precious daughter, and my mother would occasionally look at me with conflicted eyes, but what she always said was for me to indulge my younger sister. When I was 18, Julia accused me of stealing her things with no evidence, only her words. I was scolded by my father and mother. Mary, Julia's friend, was one of the people who bullied me, always advising Julia on how to bully me, and she was the one who cursed me the worst, all because her boyfriend had said something ambiguous to me and then accused me of seducing him. That wasn't enough. In the cold winter, I was pushed down into the snow. Several people pinned me down tightly, and I couldn't break free. I could only watch Nick stand in front of me with a mocking face, one foot stepping on my wrist. He said, "Since your hands and feet are dirty, then you shouldn't need this hand." He wanted to disable my hand, and that kick showed no mercy. On that December day, I was in pain, cold sweat all over my body, the hatred in my heart trapped in a cage, roaring, but like a trapped animal. No matter how I struggled, it was useless. That day my hand went numb. I was so scared that I called Gary, who I hadn't been in touch with for a long time. Julia answered the phone. She said Gary had bought her milk tea and left his phone with her. I didn't say anything and hung up the phone. That day I took all my savings and money I had asked from my mother to go to the hospital. The doctor said luckily I came in time, or else my hand would have been completely disabled. My hand wasn't disabled, but it left behind a chronic condition. It would ache faintly when it touched cold water or the weather turned cold. When I was 19, I had a car accident, caused by Julia. When I wasn't feeling well from sunstroke, she pushed me from behind. I fell into a pool of blood, watching Nick comforting the frightened Julia not far away. In the hospital, I was conscious but in a coma for half a month. Only my mother visited once during that time, stayed for an hour, and then left. I wanted revenge, to make everyone who had bullied me pay the price. This idea didn't just occur to me this time, I had thought about it a long time ago. Since no one protected me, I had to protect myself. After staying at home for more than 2 years, I figured out everyone's personalities: my father, mother, Julia, Nick, and Mary. Several times I went into my father's study with an excuse, and found a photo there. In the photo, there was a young and pretty woman who looked somewhat like Julia, with the words Sandy. Julia didn't resemble my mother. I couldn't have them do a paternity test, so I did a probe. At the dinner table, I fabricated meeting a person named Sandy on the street. My father reacted almost subconsciously, looking towards Julia, and Julia also looked at my father. That glance confirmed everything for me. Having been in a coma for 15 days, I also planned for 15 days. I chose to stage the beginning of retaliation as amnesia from the car accident, concealing all my sharpness, softening my voice, my character, becoming the silly older sister who indulged everything and obeyed her little sister. During this process, I was looking for suitable targets to manipulate. Bumping into Nick on the stairs wasn't an accident, I did it deliberately. Nick liked Julia, Julia liked Gary. Having grown up together with Nick, she naturally knew Nick liked her, but they understood each other too well, and Julia felt Nick lacked freshness. Gary and Nick were different types. Nick would use ways to annoy her to get her attention. Like a child, Gary gave off a perfect vibe. Gary had high emotional intelligence. Every little thing could make Julia, this little girl, bloom with happiness, unable to stop smiling. Having their crush stolen, Nick naturally wasn't willing. His personality prevented him from compromising. His greatest concession was confessing to Julia, but after being rejected, his attitude towards Julia became even worse. Nick was nice to me purely to provoke Julia. The numbers he used to contact me were never his own. It wasn't every time Julia brought me to interrupt Gary's dates that he would appear, but whether I was there or not, as long as those two were on a date, he would cause trouble. I forged love letters, using Mary's boyfriend as the catalyst, causing Julia and Mary to break off their friendship and become enemies. That was the first goal. The second goal was to get revenge on Mary's boyfriend. The third goal was to free up the place beside Julia and let Selena take over. Selena was carefully chosen by me. She resembled Sandy in the mole at the corner of her eye, so I instructed her not to cover it. Selena was very good at reading people's eyes. How could she not see the difference in my father's gaze towards her? She was dazzled by the splendor of the family. I hinted at a path for her to have all the splendor, and she naturally wouldn't miss this opportunity. Nick was nice to me, buying me snacks, bringing textbooks, but I knew he wasn't interested. He was only trying to provoke Julia and test me. He brought snacks, not my favorite, but Julia's. He never treated me so well. Will people who like him harm me? But it's all part of my plan. It's better this way. I let people who like him know that he likes Julia. Mary wants to retaliate against Julia and will contact anyone who dislikes Julia, especially those who are jealous and hate her. Julia doesn't like Nick being nice to me, but she knows he's just trying to provoke her. She never really gets angry about it. She just mocks me in her mind. The matter between Julia and Gary was posted on the campus forum by Nick. It was my suggestion to Nick to expose it. Julia might break up with Gary, fulfilling the childhood vow. Nick sent those messages. Mary and some classmates who disliked Julia were secretly pushing it. Nick is the mastermind, making sure Julia doesn't find out. I hinted that Gary's parents wouldn't approve. It's hard for him to succeed. Gary is willing to use any means to succeed, just like meth night. Nick and I talked on the phone. He seemed to realize what happened between Julia and Gary. We chatted all night, and he said he seemed to have completely fallen for me. I knew he was starting to like me, and this time it seemed genuine. But what does it matter? Selena chose to ruin Julia's 18th birthday party in this way because of my hint. I suggested to her that her father wouldn't accept any child from a woman. Instead, he would make that person disappear. Selena, who was afraid but greedy, found Mary. Mary could give her what she wanted. As long as she performed well, she would receive more. After obtaining a video that could threaten Julia, Selena felt completely at ease. She could create chaos, and Mary would reward her. Selena held the power and Julia dared not do anything to her. I gradually turned my mother against Julia and brought her to my side. Julia was kidnapped, and it was my mother who helped Julia escape, even providing her with an escape route. The kidnappers were hired by my mother, which led to their swift capture. All of this was orchestrated by me. Julia and her father never suspected. I made her father doubt that they were being set up. I also sent a message to Nick under the kidnapper's name, asking him to save Julia. Despite preparing to move on and having feelings for someone else, Nick couldn't stand by and watch Julia in danger, so he went to rescue her. His wrist wasn't broken from a car accident, it was me hitting him repeatedly with an iron rod. He screamed in pain the whole time but couldn't see me, only a trembling Julia nearby, too scared to make a sound. Julia lured Nick into the room as bait because the kidnappers told her to trade places with someone else to ensure her safety. Later, the kidnapper informed Nick of this trade. Seeing Julia, Nick's gaze felt like he was looking at his worst enemy. The man who suddenly appeared was my setup, resembling Julia to some extent. The hospital for the paternity test had long been arranged, with the results verified but the names switched. The man's blood type matched the father's. Her father believed it. I told him I wouldn't let them get away, and I orchestrated a game where everyone was a pawn, and in the end, I succeeded. Then, I gradually sidelined her father. I drugged him with a harmless but mood-altering medicine, and after sidelining him, I had him sent to the hospital for seclusion. My mother didn't say much. She didn't want much contact with me, living her life as a wealthy wife. We were like strangers to each other. As for an ex, I visited Gary in prison. It was her father who sent him there. It had been several years, and he still had 5 more years to serve. When Gary saw me, it was as if he saw hope, hoping I could save him. I stood at the door and recounted what happened to him after he was imprisoned. Through the iron bars, his eyes were bloodshot as he looked at me. You didn't lose your memory. You never lost your memory. It was ridiculous that he fell for it too. I didn't directly answer his question. Gary, you know me, you know my character. Of course, he knew how ruthless I could be. At the age of 12, I took a knife and bit his dog. I was scared, but Gary got hurt trying to save me. I had to avenge him. At 13, I pushed Gary's brother into the river in a secluded area. If that child hadn't been lucky, he would have died. At 14, when my adult brother wanted to do something to me, I cut him several times. Thankfully, my foster parents saw it. I kept the recordings, and they didn't dare touch me. Fate didn't give them a chance. Gary, I was wrong, I was really wrong, he cried. But I wasn't the person who used to be all about him. Gary, we can't go back, I said. From the moment his heart began to lean towards Julia, we couldn't turn back. I'm a perfectionist. After that, I became a shrewd female CEO in everyone's eyes. I didn't cherish beauty, only power and money. I only loved one person in my life, and after my heart died, I only loved money and power. Nothing is more reliable than what I hold in my hands. I raised some boys out of a whim, like pets, in exchange for mutual needs. At the age of 50, my father had a stroke and became a vegetable. I visited him once when no one else was there. I looked at the man in the hospital bed, and there was a smile at the corner of his lips. Dad, it was you who abandoned me back then, right? That was my initial guess, and later it was confirmed. It was him who had someone leave me at the orphanage gate because I was not the child he wanted in his life. Dad, Julia is your daughter, your biological daughter. But unfortunately, you lost her, completely lost her. I saw my father's hand move slightly, and then all the vital signs showed drastic changes. He heard me. That satisfies me. Coming out of the hospital, I looked up at the clear sunlight above my head, reminiscent of the day when I was retrieved at the age of 17. It was such nice weather outside, and Gary was comforting me in the car. I was nervous yet hopeful, fantasizing about my mother reaching out, holding my hand, and calling me baby. But that never happened, and now I don't need it anymore. Julia's epilogue. Boss, this dish is too expensive. Can you make it cheaper? In the noisy marketplace, a woman with shoulder-length hair tied carelessly squatted in front of a stall, her eyes fixed on a mostly white slab of pork on the counter. The meat looked somewhat stale, and the price was therefore much lower compared to the fresher cuts nearby. This is already the cheapest price. I can't go any lower, the stall owner said. The woman lifted her head, revealing a pale face with eyes marked by several red blood vessels, dull and lifeless. My child is sick at home, malnourished. The doctor said she needs some nutritious food, so I want to make her some pork broth, she said, her eyes turning red. The stall owner, also a woman, sighed as she looked at her and said, I'll give you 3 yuan off per pound. The woman expressed gratitude and said, I'll take 2 pounds. As she watched the stall owner cut the meat and paid, she also slipped in a small piece of fresh meat. Seeing the woman's blank gaze, the stall owner handed her the bag. Take care of the child, she'll get better in a few days. Tears welled up in the woman's eyes as she deeply bowed, saying thank you. Watching the woman walk away, someone couldn't help but ask the stall owner, how can you afford to do business at a loss like this? We're all women, I understand her situation, any little help matters, she's a pitiful soul. Exiting the market, she looked up at the clock. It was 7 o'clock. The sun had completely risen, the air was fresh, and there were more people on the street than when she arrived. Glancing at the meat in her hands, a smile involuntarily crept onto the woman's face. Just then, a bus pulled up. She quickly jogged over, but by the time she squeezed in, the bus was already packed. Some were having breakfast, some had just finished work, sweaty, and there were also some who had just smoked. The carriage was filled with an unpleasant smell, but the woman was already used to it. In front of her, someone was watching short videos on their phone with the volume turned up, and she couldn't help but see it too. The most eye-catching thing on the short video was several large fonts. YW Group Female CEO Press Conference. Her breath caught in her throat. Below the text was a woman in a suit who, despite being in her 30s, looked like she was in her 20s, except for a pair of serene eyes that made people not dare to see her as a young and naive girl through the phone screen. She locked eyes with those eyes, and the oldest memories came flooding back, almost swallowing her whole. Before the age of 18, I was the most favored daughter. My father named me Julia. At the age of 12, I learned that I was not my mother's biological daughter. My birth mother had already passed away, giving birth to me prematurely. At the age of 12, on what I thought was an ordinary day, my father said he wanted to take me on a trip. I agreed, only to find out that it was my birthday that day, even though my ID showed a date 3 months later. My father told me about the events of that year. It was a cliché. My father met a classmate in college, and they fell in love, but they only graduated in less than 3 years. My father's parents demanded him to have a business marriage and marry the person they were most satisfied with. My father resisted but eventually failed and had to surrender. However, his relationship with his classmate did not end. They were secretive, never letting anyone find out. During this time, the classmate became pregnant and eventually gave birth to a baby girl who died of childbirth complications. My father felt guilty beyond measure, but the person had passed away, and no amount of guilt could make amends. So he turned his attention to the baby girl. He wanted to make it up to her, to give her the best of everything. Coincidentally, his wife became pregnant again, 5 months along. So after his wife gave birth, she switched the 2 babies. That day, my father got drunk, completely intoxicated. I asked many questions, and he answered all of them. I asked him what happened to the baby girl who was switched with me. He said she had died a long time ago. Although it wasn't he who caused her death, he couldn't escape the connection. She was a premature baby, born after 8 months, and combined with the fact that the pregnant woman was sad during pregnancy due to losing her eldest daughter, even suffering from mild to moderate depression, the baby had a weak heart from birth. The doctor said she needed good care, and if she was well taken care of, there would be no issues. But at that time, my father was focused on his favorite child, paying no attention to the premature baby. When he finally remembered, the baby couldn't survive the heart issues. I asked my father why my mother had a premature birth. My father smiled, his gaze distant and unfocused. It was me, I did it, I had someone do it. At that time, you were already 3 months old. If we waited 2 more months, you would have been 5 months old, and it would have been difficult to switch, so we had to do it early. His words gave me chills down my spine. But I couldn't blame my father. He did all this for me. Maybe he owed too many people too much, but he never owed me. Others might have reason to call him cruel, but I didn't. Maybe at that time, I felt a little guilty and uneasy. Otherwise, I wouldn't have, at the age of 15, asked my father to bring back the sister abandoned outside. I could always go in and out of my father's company freely, everywhere was accessible to me. That day, when my father was in a meeting, I entered his office. On the desk, I saw a folder. Open the folder, inside is a document with Wendy's name prominently displayed. Seeing a girl in the document who is completely different from me. By the time Dad came back from the meeting, I had finished reading everything. Dad told me that this was Mom's first child, whom he had abandoned back then. He and Mom had been married for a year at that time, and he, filled with hatred, targeted the helpless baby. That girl was truly pitiful. Just looking at that document made me see a level of misery beyond my understanding. A moment of pity led me to suggest to Dad to bring the person back. Initially reluctant, Dad eventually agreed due to my coaxing. The next day after saying it, I regretted it. But there was no going back, as Mom also knew about the situation. Seeing her beaming with excitement, my regret deepened further, and I began to feel resistant and displeased with the so-called sister who was about to arrive. On the day I met that person, these emotions reached their peak. Being pampered and raised by others since childhood, I never hid my emotions. After all, others have always catered to me, lifting me up. When I speak, whether pleasant or harsh, they all have to take it with a smile. So, I began to bully her, without any restraint. No one said anything against me. At most Mom would tell me to stop, but even with a few coquettish words, she'd lean towards me. When did everything start to change? It seems to be after Wendy's car accident. Before that, I had everything. Since Wendy's accident, little by little, I lost everything. People who liked me, people I liked, parents, friends, inheritance. All gone. I was driven out of the house with a heart full of resentment. At that time, I hated everyone, thinking they all betrayed and abandoned me. But I also knew one thing clearly. I had offended too many people, and those people wouldn't let me off easily. So, I wanted to escape. Initially, I still had a lot of money, enough to squander for a lifetime. But I had bad luck and ran into human traffickers. To avoid being beaten, to avoid being sold, in a short period, I gave away all my money. This money also bought me time, allowing me to wait until the police came to rescue me. On the day of my rescue, I crouched on the ground trembling. Someone walked past me, patted my shoulder, and comforted me with a few words. Everyone had relatives coming to pick them up, except for me, all alone in the end. I only managed to recover a portion of my money, most of it was gone forever. With that money, I managed to survive in a completely unfamiliar city. I didn't choose to continue studying or find a job. My habit of spending extravagantly didn't change at all, even at that time, so my money quickly ran out. With no money left, I had to go to work. But work was too exhausting, working tirelessly for a month's pay, not even comparable to the pocket money I had in the past. I switched from one job to another. What ultimately made me give in was hunger, poverty, and homelessness. From initially feeling uncomfortable, I gradually became just an ordinary person among the crowd. Later, I met a man. He was average looking, everything about him was average, but he treated me well, cared for me, helped me with work, and picked me up and dropped me off at work. He made me experience being pampered again after several years. Acting impulsively, I married him, with no dowry, no wedding, no ring. This man, with his sweet talk, and promises of a future, effortlessly won me over. Post-marriage, things weren't pleasant. The man's true nature revealed itself: selfish, hot-tempered, possessive, fond of drinking, foul-mouthed. Unwilling to do housework, not seeking outside work, hanging out with a group of friends every day. When he spoke, it was either cursing at me or asking for money, resorting to stealing directly if he couldn't get it. These days almost made me collapse, and at that time, I got pregnant. After the 10-month pregnancy, my daughter was born. Holding her in my arms, looking at her wrinkled little face, I cried. My daughter became everything to me, the motivation and support to keep going. I wanted to give her the best in this world. However, I had nothing, couldn't provide her with any good material things, and my love seemed so cheap. My daughter became my final line. For her sake, I wanted a divorce. After the divorce, I took on multiple jobs and was able to provide my daughter with better milk powder, clean clothes, snacks in her hands, without having to envy others. Without her at 3 or 4 years old telling me she didn't like what she ate. The bus arrival message startled the woman. The person watching the video had already gotten off. She pushed her way down with a group of people. Her phone rang, a friend calling her. The friend told her there was hope for a divorce. Even if the other party didn't agree, as long as evidence of domestic violence could be provided, there was a 60% chance of getting a divorce. She couldn't help but cry, saying thank you repeatedly. Back in her shabby rented apartment, as she opened the door, she saw a small figure running towards her, hugging her legs, smiling up at her. "Mom, I drew you today, look." Her eyes watery, she knelt down and embraced the small person. "Okay, let Mom take a look." There was a time she hated everyone. Until the moment her daughter was born and she held the small child in her arms, the daughter became her life. Looking at her, she was ready to risk everything for her.